the Africa group of negotiators went to COP29 with clinching a deal in the trillions. I think the benchmark was $1.8 trillion dollars. But unfortunately, which a lot of experts will agree that the outcome and the money that was put on the table, which started with a deal of about 250 billion USD, and then after heated conversations and negotiations, we had 300 billion on the table. A lot of climate change experts have described this move as a sham and disappointing, particularly for developing nations who contribute less to generally global emissions in the world. And so this ask has been ongoing for a couple of years, and 300 billion is not going to cut it, as most developing countries have said. But I think despite this challenge, I think COP29 has made headway in really telling us, okay, how are these monies, going to be paid? What is the process like? There was conversations around expediting the process and doing it, with immediate effect, so that, countries can inculcate that into their climate change plans going forward. And so we cannot all say that COP29 was a bad deal. At least we've made headway, and I think most of the lessons right now is to prepare better as we go for COP30 in Brazil.
How is the country planning to utilize this amount of money to get to the root where this climate problem are actually happening, especially in Maiduguri?
I think a major challenge as well is around, okay, when we give you these monies, what exactly are you going to use these for? Is there a monitoring and evaluation mechanism in place to see how these funds are being utilized? How are the people, at the lower level going to benefit from this?
Are you saying Nigeria has achieved the purpose of COP29?
For Africa, it has been described as a sham. That was not what we were cut out for. Yeah. But regardless, we're making it's a way to make headway. And for me, I think at the moment is really looking inward and not heavily relying on finance from the international community, even though that is what we rely on heavily, is to look inwards and come up with solutions that are inbuilt, that are nuanced solutions that could help us tackle some of these climate change challenges within our countries, before those monies come in. And at the end of the day, I think what we want to see is a mechanism of how these funds are being spent. For us to really see this come true, those in charge need to make sure there's monitoring and evaluation in place. There's transparency in the process. They involve local people in these processes, and also make sure that some of the solutions that we're putting out are tailored to local needs of the people.
There's also a major problem of transitioning from fossil fuel. How do you think Nigeria is meant to manage this? Because we rely wholly on coal, petroleum, and all of that. So other countries are also experiencing that. Yeah. And so people are hesitating from moving from the use of this fossil fuel. Yeah. So how do we effectively engage in this transition?
For a country like Nigeria, transition is going to be a very long road, because, for developing nations, when you talk about transition, it's money. You need to have money on the table, and we do not have the leverage of that. But I'm really glad that there are ongoing conversations around transitioning from fossil fuels and moving to renewables. It's not easy. I think I was having a conversation with a couple of people around using solar and stuff, and they're like, solar is expensive, It's very, very expensive. And for us, I think that at the moment, what needs to be stable for us is electricity, and we need to work heavily on that before we go into larger focuses on renewables. So at the end of the day, is around funding, training, enlightenment. Yes.
In global conversations like COP29, the larger developed countries, their voice seems to be louder, and indigenous smaller communities tend to be marginalized.
I think it's totally normal for developed countries to have stronger voices, because they are the guys with the money, with the cash, right? And I think it's everywhere where those in power are stronger than the weaker ones. But I think for COP29, I think I've seen a bit of change and transition. Smaller countries, developing nations, and even island countries who are also heavily impacted, by climate change issues, have come to the fore to really, really voice out. I recall when, that negotiation was happening, and then 250 billion came on the table. You're like, no, we are impacted.
Some of those clips
So we are like, no, we can't, we are not going to agree with this. This is not going to cut it, and things like that. And so I think their voice are coming to light really, really heavily, and the world is watching.
What would you wish people understood about the outcome? Because I know many people believe it's a total waste.
Prior for the Nigerian delegation going to COP, we had no idea who was going to COP. When they were traveling, what were the conversations put on the table? And so it was like, okay, nobody knows what is happening, and we work with a lot of partners on the ground, and it comes down to, okay, who are the people coming from Nigeria? We need to have conversations with them. We need to interview them. We need to hear their own side of what, they are negotiating for. But I think what I'm really glad about is as an African nation, we are all fighting for the same thing, and which is climate financing. And Nigeria is also part of those conversations.
So in preparation for COP30 at Brazil, what attitude do you think Nigerians should change regarding climate change and issues?
When disaster happens, like, this is from God. Some say, okay, it's a punishment from God, and things like that. And so I think, and there's also issue of disinformation. There's a lot of climate change disinformation going on. The climate change issues Nigerians particularly understand is when it has to do with floods, when it has to do with droughts. I think there's a lot happening around droughts as well. When there's change in weather patterns, the heat wave, that happened this year and is going to get even worse next year. And so those are like the conversations that we understand down here. And so we still need to do a lot of informing, trainings around understanding some of these issues.
If our media are not really enlightened about climate issues, so how do they communicate this to the larger society?
We need a lot of resources to support journalists to really understand what climate change looks like, and how to even portray those kind of messaging in our reports.
Many poor countries failed to prepare for climate change, like drought, flood, and all of that. So how do you think these countries should prepare ahead of future disasters?
We don't take things seriously until they happen. And so it can get very tricky when it becomes, okay, it's when things happen that we respond. And so we need to put disaster response mechanisms in place ahead of some of these disasters that happen. And again, the conversation was to go back to funding. People that live in flood-prone areas, you hear things like, okay, you guys need to move to so place. So where are we moving to? For some people, that's all they know, that's all they have. Where are they moving to? Have you made provision for these people to actually move? Are there emergency routes for people to evacuate when things like this happen? And so we need to really make sure that we have disaster response and resilience mechanisms. And that's the money we're asking for adaptation and climate resilience. That's really what, developing nations are asking for at COP. You can't wait for government to do everything for you, right? As individuals, we all have to play our part as well. And so I think we need to re-strategize on how we buy people into the climate change conversations. Policymakers play a very, very important role because those are the people that will help us get these monies, in international conversations. And those are the people who represent these local people on the international scene. I think just like elections, our policymakers need to be very deliberate. There needs to be a political will I know we have so many challenges, and climate change should be one of those really, really serious
climate change is just coming
conversations.
into the limelight.
Yeah, so we need it's about our future and that of our children, and so we need to take climate change conversations very, very, very seriously.